I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Sue Keisler, Board Vice President of xMinds, the organization hosting tonight's event. To begin with, for the Spanish speakers in the audience, I want to play a recording to give you instructions for finding the Spanish audio channel.
Para escuchar esta presentación en español, acá clic en la opción de menú Interpretación y seleccione Español.
So this is the third and last session of the xMinds hosted presentation of MCPS special education placements for students who are on the autism spectrum. This session will cover placements for elementary age students. Our goal tonight is to bring to you a thorough and clear review of all the special education services and programs that MCPS offers to elementary age students on the autism spectrum. All of our speakers are MCPS staff who know these programs intimately. We're very grateful to them for taking the time to prepare their presentations and for being here to share that information with our parent community. Just as there is a wide range in the support needs of students who are autistic, there's a correspondingly wide range of programs and services that MCPS offers to support these kids. We'll present these programs roughly in order from the programs providing the least support to programs providing the most support tonight. The first half of the presentation will cover all the programs that lead to graduating with a high school diploma. After a break for questions and answers, we will then resume for the second half of the presentation, which will cover programs where students follow alternate learning outcomes, or ALO, and will complete high school with a high school certificate rather than a diploma. After that second half, we'll again have time for more questions. We've asked tonight's speakers to provide you with a level of detail that isn't available on the MCPS website. We're doing this because we believe parents need this information. For each program, we asked presenters to answer the following questions. What's the general profile of students who thrive in this program? What are the key differences between this program and other programs that may sound similar? Where is this program located? What parts of the day are students included with non-disabled peers? How does this program support development of social skills and executive functioning skills? And what are the class sizes and what is the ratio between staff and students? If these questions are not fully answered or you have other questions, please write your questions in the chat at any time. Nora Dudwick will read out your questions to the presenters during the next Q&A period. A word about questions. Presenters tonight know all about the programs they run, but they don't know your child. So the questions they can answer are questions about their programs, but they will not be able to answer questions about where your child will fit best. Ultimately, where your child is placed will be a decision made by your IEP team. But remember that you parents are important members of this team. The more you know about your child's placement options, the better advocate you can be for your child when it comes to placement decisions. MCPS and xMinds have partnered to provide you with essential information about these programs so that, armed with that information, you will be better equipped to assess where your child might be best served. We've asked our presenters to minimize specialized terminology, but if you hear something you don't understand, please use the chat to ask for clarification. MCPS staff who are in this meeting will be able to clarify terminology in the chat, and if we think it would be helpful, one of the xMinds volunteers will interrupt the speakers to ask for an explanation. Now, to give you an overview of the services and programs in MCPS that support our autistic students, I would like to welcome MCPS Supervisor of Services for Autistic Students, Kristin Secan. Chris, thank you for all the work you put into getting information out to our parent community tonight, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sue. I first want to say thank you and point out that I believe this is the 15th or 16th year in a row that several of us on this call have participated in this event with xMinds. We started in a basement of the Twinbrook Library, and look how much this event has grown. We're very grateful to be a part of it. I want to welcome all parents on behalf of the Office of Special Education. We highly value the longstanding partnership with xMinds, and we know that xMinds promotes the goal of ensuring that parents in our community are aware of the continuum of services for students with autism in MCPS. We continue to see very significant growth in the number of autistic students that we serve, as you'll see tonight. In addition to the growth in autism worldwide, we hear from families who move to Montgomery County specifically so their students can learn with our colleagues who have joined us this evening to speak with you. We take great pride in the confidence that you as parents have in our teachers, paraeducators, therapists, building principals, and all those who stand by your child every day. Tonight, you will hear about a very broad continuum of services provided in MCPS. We want to make sure that our students are prepared to leave us as valuable members of our community, no matter the path they're pursuing after graduation. Please take note, we intentionally speak of services rather than programs to remind ourselves and let our communities know that MCPS provides students the services on their IEP or their individual education program. A program is a place, services are specially designed instruction and related services required by a student to make progress on their IEP goals and objectives. MCPS places great importance on family engagement, and we rely on our partners, particularly those like xMinds, to help us reach families of all students, particularly those who are receiving special education services as a student who is autistic. These opportunities offer learning and networking opportunities designed to support and enhance our parents' and guardians' ability to meaningfully participate in their students' education. I would like to thank the president of xMinds, Nora Dedwick, the vice president, Sue Keisler, and Melanie Carlos, our executive director of xMinds, for this continued partnership. I hope that each and every family member present this evening benefits from the wealth of information that will be shared. I also want to thank my MCPS colleagues who are here tonight to present this information to you. It's a testament to the work of our office that staff so value their opportunity to partner with families. Thank you again to everyone who is working so hard to make this evening a success. If we could go to the next slide. Our outcomes are simply that we share an overview of special education services in MCPS and inform participants of the continuum of special education services provided in both diploma services and alternate learning outcome services. Clearly, our emphasis tonight will be on how we serve students who are autistic. Next slide, please. This pie chart has been around for about 15 years, and it's interesting to see how it's grown and changed over the years. What this chart represents is a graphic showing by percentage of the different services where children with a primary educational diagnosis of autism are served in Montgomery County. The smallest number of our students are receiving speech resource services only, and the largest number are receiving services in a homeschool model. If you take a moment to look at this graphic, which is not always easy to see on your home computer, but I know xMinds will do it justice in sharing, you will see that just as we support a spectrum of students, they are placed in a spectrum of services across the county. And I think this is important to remember. It's our goal to do so because we are trying, after all, to serve our students in an individual fashion. So I hope that you'll bear that in mind as we talk about the different services. If we could go to our next slide, I would like to introduce my colleague, Katie Bettis, who's an instructional specialist in the Department of Special Education Services. Thank you, Katie, for being here tonight to talk to our families about homeschool model.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for having me. So homeschool model services, the name more or less describes the services. Oh, you can go to the next slide. The name really describes where the services are provided, and that would be in the student's community school, or as we call it, their home school, the school that all the kids in the neighborhood attend. In homeschool model services, a majority of the students stay and a majority of their special education services are provided in the general education classroom with students age-alike peers. Students receiving homeschool model services have a wide variety of disabilities and a wide variety of needs. Some students have their needs include, academic areas such as reading, writing, and math, as well as areas like social skills, executive functioning, and organization. The next slide. During the course of a student's day, students spend, as I said earlier, a majority of the day in the general education classroom. And that includes for their academic times, as well as lunch, recess, and specials. Small group and individual supports are provided by the general education teacher, the special education teacher, as special education paraeducators, as well as other members of the IEP team, like the reading, like the speech and language pathologist, the occupational therapist, and the physical therapist. Services, special education services may be provided outside of the general education setting based on students' needs. And this could be to participate in maybe a small reading or math group, math intervention. Perhaps there's a small group working on building self-regulation skills or social skills, problem-solving skills, or they may leave the general education classroom to participate in speech and language therapy or occupational therapy. But it really depends on the student's needs. Next slide. To further support students, supplementary aids and services and accommodations are embedded throughout the student's day. And we talk about, low tech and higher tech assistive technology, but low tech items include things like personal schedules that support independence throughout a student's day, help reinforce classroom routines or expectations, pictures or visual supports to help facilitate understanding and also to help students communicate more as well. You'll often see students using fidgets to help, sustain attention and meet their sensory needs. Many schools have flexible seating options like the cube chairs or a wobble stool. Some classrooms have tables very low to the ground, if it's helpful for students to sit on a ground to help sustain attention and meet their sensory needs. And then we also have students who require some higher tech assistive technology, and those might be voice output devices to help them communicate. You'll see many of our older students perhaps using speech-to-text device, speech-to-text enabled on their Chromebooks to help with, extended writing, and word processors for those who require them for writing as well. Okay. So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Haley Bindanda. Sorry, Haley, I hope I said that right, to speak about our Autism Connections program.
No problem. Thanks, Katie. Hi, I'm Haley Bindanda. I am a school psychologist with MCPS for Autism Services. I'm very excited to be with you all tonight, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our Autism Connections program. So our connection services are only available in a few schools throughout MCPS, not in every school like the homeschool model that Katie just talked about. So if it is deemed that connection services are going to be the best fit for a child, they will be routed to whatever the closest school that has those services is to their home school. So there's of course no like one student profile for this program, but I'm just going to go over about a little bit of what we typically see most from our students who benefit from connection services. So our students in our services access the general education curriculum for their grade, either on or above grade level. Many of our students do tend to be academically gifted. However, they might require support to be successful due to some different barriers and differences. So things like maybe struggling with organization, struggling with initiating tasks and following through with that task. Struggling with coping with emotions, and then something we call cognitive rigidity, which is kind of just a fancy way to say it's hard to be flexible sometimes. So struggling when things don't go the way I wanted them to go, or when things aren't predictable like I wanted them to be. So we're trying to help our students to move past that so that they can be successful. Next slide, please. The majority of students that receive connection services and benefit from them do have either average or above average expressive and receptive language skills. So a lot of our students have really expansive vocabularies. A lot of them know more words than I do. I honestly learn something new every time I go in. But they might struggle a little bit with what we call pragmatic language. So thinking of how to have a back and forth conversation with somebody, how to infer something, to pick up when someone's maybe not happy with you, right? And so how to have those successful social interactions. Sometimes our students need help with that. And then often our students have a strong desire to develop friendships and social relationships, but they might need a little bit of help. They might find that they struggle a bit to develop friendships among their same age peers. So that is, again, something our staff are trained to help our students on the autism spectrum with some of those challenges related to being on the spectrum, as well as some of their strengths as well. And I did want to mention, Brandy, if you could go back to the other slide really quick, I forgot to mention that one, thank you. Students do not legally need to have a primary code of autism on their IEP to be served through Connections. The majority of our students tend to have that primary code of autism, and the reason for that is that that kind of implies that the main reason they need special education services is because of those needs related to autism. So that's why we tend to see most of our students with Connection services do have that code of autism. However, it is not a legal requirement, and many of our students have additional diagnoses such as ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Okay, you can go back to the other one, Brandy, thank you. One more. Thank you. And so some of our service features in the Connections program. So I kind of think of it as like Ms. Secan was saying, special education is services, not a place. So there's kind of two modes through which our students might receive their support in the Connections program. So one is going to be in the general education setting with their same age peers, but with some special education support. So a paraeducator or a special educator might push into that classroom with them to offer some support, but they are fully integrated. They are being exposed to the grade level content. And that is for the vast majority of their day. So that's going to be math, science, social studies, what we call specials. So things like music, art, PE, lunch, and recess. The times of the day when they are going to be in their Connections classroom, which is just with the other students who are receiving Connection services, as well as their special education teacher and paraeducators, is for English language arts. And then as well as a social skills block. And really what that is we follow a curriculum called Unstuck and On Target. And every day we're doing these social skills lessons with students to kind of help them to work through some of those strengths and needs I talked about before, like the cognitive rigidity, that social communication, how to cope with those big emotions when they come up. These things that sometimes we know can get in the way of our students being happy and successful. So really that is the general program model. Again, it can be a bit flexible depending on student need, but this is typically, a student's day in Connections, so to speak. So thank you so much. Now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Sandy Ives, who is going to talk about our SESES.
Thank you, Haley. Good evening, and thank you for having me tonight. I'm Dr. Sandy Ives, and I supervise what's called social emotional special education services across our county. And we have 8, these services are in 8 different elementary schools across the system. Next slide. So just to give you kind of an idea of the challenges that our students may come with, here is what some of our students have. Demonstrate significant social emotional learning and or behavioral challenges that adversely affect their ability to access the curriculum in the general education environment. They require support for frustration tolerance, appropriate coping mechanisms, social skills, anger management, collaborating with peers, and conflict resolution. Most of our students demonstrate average cognitive skills, and all of our students are accessing the general education curriculum. Some of our students do exhibit below grade level achievement and may require some additional interventions to address reading, math, and writing needs. I think there's one more. Oh, one more very important thing. I just can't see it there. A lot of social skills instruction is required, and we do offer small counseling groups pretty significantly. And we also are doing a lot of on-the-spot problem solving with our students, with the support of the special ed teachers, the paraeducators, social workers, and psychologists. Next slide. So typically, our students are receiving special education services across the continuum. They can receive instruction in self-contained classes in the areas of English, math, social studies, and science, with opportunities for inclusion in general education as they are ready for that. Support from special education and general education staff for art, music, PE, lunch, recess, field trips, and assemblies. And we actually have a licensed clinical social worker on staff in each set of services to offer intensive counseling, as our students do need that based on their goals and objectives. In addition, we have a behavior support teacher that provides additional behavioral support throughout the school day to all of the students in the program, in the services. Thank you. And I will introduce Ms. Kelly Giron, Area Supervisor, Department of Special Education.
Thank you, Dr. Ives. I'm going to talk about our school-based learning centers. These are services in about 12 elementary schools across the county, and really looking at all of our more restrictive services. The IEP team might look at a school-based learning center really when the team has exhausted all the resources that the homeschool model services provide, and the student, we have evidence that the student needs something more intensive. If you can go to the next slide. Students who may be appropriate for our learning center services typically have global academic delays that are about 2 to 3 years below grade level, and global delays in social development. So for example, a student might have significant delays in comprehension or that ability to understand, and that impacts him or her across all academic areas. Students may also have significant decoding needs. Students in the elementary learning centers have a variety of disabilities. At this time, our learning centers do have a high percentage of students with autism, but they also serve students with specific learning disabilities, emotional disabilities, ADHD, speech and language impairments, and some other disabilities. And like I said, there's evidence that the impact of the student's disability impacts their ability to access the general education curriculum in that general education environment. In the learning centers, students are working towards general education curriculum standards that are aligned to their grade level of enrollment. So they are on that diploma-bound track. However, they require significant modifications and adaptations to the curriculum. This means, and I'll show some examples in a minute, but that the typical pacing in the general education environment, the methods of instruction, the student needs something more intensive. So where we're using a lot more visuals, a lot more repeated practice, a lot of heavy teacher modeling, things like that. Typically, students who are appropriate for our learning center services have adaptive skills that allow them to access what we call the comprehensive school setting. So they can access that school building, given age-appropriate guidelines. They can navigate the building, maybe leave their classroom to walk to the office. They are able to use the bathroom to wash their hands somewhat independently. They don't necessarily need that heavy support for eating beyond what most other children do. With that said, Students in the Elementary Learning Center may also receive support individually on some of these adaptive skills as needed. Like I started, our learning centers are regionally based services. They are not in every elementary school. And this is why we work so hard to make sure we have exhausted everything in our homeschool models, because it's a big deal to pull a child from his or her neighborhood school. These services are in grades kindergarten through grade 5. Core instruction is provided in what we call a self-contained classroom. That means that all the students in the classroom have an IEP, and they have similar impacts from their disability that requires that self-contained setting. The class is taught by a special education teacher with paraeducator supports. We feel very strongly that inclusion is important, so we provide it on a case-by-case basis as much as possible. Students are included for specials, art, music, and PE, as well as lunch and recess with support. We include students in various academic areas as appropriate, but keep in mind, if a student requires the intensive services to move him or her into this setting, then they really need that self-contained setting for most of their academics. As Ms. Bettis said, we can provide reading interventions and math interventions in the homeschool. We're looking at that intensive modified instruction for the academic day. So examples of supports specific to our children with autism. Our elementary learning centers can provide all the supplemental aids and services that are provided in the homeschool, but a few things that you might see that are different. Small group and or individualized support is needed. In my experience in our learning centers, most instruction is done in small groups. You have several adults in the classroom, which really lends itself to some intensive small group instruction to help move the students along. For example, when you look at math, you might have a teacher at a table with a few students, you might have a paraeducator at a table with a few other students, and what this does is it decreases that group size to allow that individualization of the lesson to help each student access it. Just like in the homeschool, related services are provided in the classroom or in a pull-out basis as appropriate. So we're talking about our speech, our occupational therapy, physical therapy, adaptive PE. Some supplementary aids and services that you might see specific to the Learning Center. For instance, like Katie talked about, a low tech might be bump paper. And in the homeschool model, you might have an individual student who we have taught to use it because that's what he needs. In the Learning Center, we typically have a group of students utilizing similar supplementary aids. So it really becomes part of the classroom environment and part of instruction. Students can access technology as needed to help them support whether they need communication devices, access to what we call speech to text, or a scribe, meaning someone needs to write for the student, or they can talk into the computer as they get older. And then we also, social skills instruction, while we have countywide resources, I know Connections uses Unstuck and On Target. In the homeschool model, it's more broad lessons. In the school-based learning center, they tend to be very explicit lessons geared towards those IEP goals. So when we think about social skills, we're really looking at, well, what's developmentally appropriate, but also the impact of the disability. What does the student need? So for example, a student with autism might need support in those social interactions. So within the classroom, we might be doing a social skills lesson with a small group of who needs those skills. So there typically is a peer group for students to practice with. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Melissa Grant, to talk about Darnestown Learning Center.
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Darnestown Learning Center. which is one of the 12 learning centers in the county. So you're going to hear some key differences in the next couple of slides as it relates to Darnestown. So it is designed for students that have a diagnosis or characteristics of autism. And the students are all pursuing a diploma and accessing the general education curriculum. Like the traditional learning center that Mr. Ron just talked about, our students are also typically 2 to 3 grade levels below and require a modified pace of instruction. And they typically need strategies that are indicative of autism. So you'll find many visual supports in our classrooms that could look like a visual schedule or an individual schedule for a student, or mini schedules which break down tasks for our students. You'll find many sensory strategies in our classroom that are built right in. And then you may find motivational systems, a lot of reinforcement for our students to help them engage in the curriculum and engage in the behaviors that we want to see in the classroom. Many of the students will typically meet the criteria of the traditional learning center, but their success is really dependent on the ability to provide that consistency of these autism-specific strategies. Next slide, please. Thank you. The way that we describe our students' profile is they typically have what we consider softer behaviors. So they have difficulty attending during instruction. They have difficulty with task engagement. So being able to sit at the desk or at the table to initiate, sustain, and complete a task. And so they do need support around that. And then many of our students have pretty solid rote skills, but when it comes to applying them to the curriculum, that's where they really struggle. And they also have difficulty with communication and using their communication spontaneously. So they have language, they just don't know how to use it when engaging with academics or trying to socially engage with peers, or to gain the attention of the adults in the classroom, to make requests for things like, I need help, I need to go to the bathroom. So making those requests. So many of our students have speech and language services. We work closely with our speech path within the classroom. Because of these delays in the area of expressive and receptive language, many of our students also have social skills goals outlined on the IEP. And so we do have a social skills curriculum. We're using TeachTown. But that's also, we also use it throughout the school day, just naturally, and use teachable moments from the time that they get off the bus to the time that they get back on the bus. If they have related services outlined on the IEP, such as speech and OT, and most of our kids do, that is delivered within the classroom or for pull out. Next slide, please. In general, just like the typical learning center, most of our students spend the majority of the day in the self-contained or smaller classroom for their core academics with their special education teacher and paraeducator support. We also believe in inclusion. However, we really try to be what's the word I'm looking for? Prescriptive when we make decisions about inclusion, so that it's purposeful for our kiddos. So we would have conversations around what their strengths are and areas that they could be included within the general education classroom. So for some of our students, it might be specials. And then for other students, they might be able to go in for part of the reading block or the math block. It just depends on the needs. So next, I'd like to introduce the principal of Carl Sandburg, Beth LaCourcier.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk about Carl Sandburg Learning Center. And so as we've been going through, we are the most restrictive environment. And so if we can go to the next slide. So Carl Sandburg serves students in grades kindergarten through 5th grade. And we have both students pursuing a diploma as well as a certificate of completion. Students access a school-wide, we have a school-wide approach to instruction and behavior management here. And students that are on the diploma track receive grade level curriculum with goals that address below grade level skills. We also have related services in the building, and we have behavior support and mental health services as well. So we are considered a public separate day school. And again, we serve students with IEPs. Students are placed here through the central process. All of our students, we have self-contained classrooms, self-contained specials, art, music, PE, and media, and lunch and recess. 100% of service hours are outside of general education. We also have on-site social work, behavior support teacher, and a full-time psychologist here. And then we have a team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists to provide on-site as well as virtual services. And I will turn it back to Chris.
Actually, I think this is Sue.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure who to turn it back to.
That's fine. Okay, so we're going to do some question and answers now. And there's some questions already in the chat. Laura Dudwick is going to read those out. And if anybody wants to ask their question out loud, that's also fine. You just click on the reaction button where it's the one that says raise hand, and Nora will call on you. And you can unmute yourself, and then please mute yourself again after you've had a chance to ask your question. Okay, Nora?
Yeah, okay. The first question concerns the homeschool model. Is MCPS fully staffed as it relates to special education paraeducators serving autistic students, or is there a shortage?
I can speak to that question, or Kelly, if you were about to, but we are experiencing a critical shortage of special educators, both teachers and paraeducators across MCPS. I saw a couple questions in here tonight. I do not have the exact numbers today, and I can't certainly speak to homeschool model, but in the discrete special education programs, we have critical shortages of teachers and paraeducators, and we are recruiting, and we would urge you and your friends to do so as well.
Okay, thanks. This is from the same person, so it's kind of part two. Why does it appear as though the social emotional learning curriculum is being treated as a substitute for the small group pragmatic language peer interaction skills for autistic students that used to be supported with lunch bunches, etc.? Is this also due to special education shortages?
I think part of that is because there is more countywide, more resources to teach social emotional skills. So I'm thinking teachers more really take that whole group approach. I would, as a parent, really when you're at the IEP team meeting, ask how the specific social skills goals are being addressed. We do have a lot of younger, newer teachers. So often talking about, well, what about this? I do have many schools who still continue to do lunch bunches, who someone, whether it be the special education teacher or the counselor, sees small groups of students to work directly on social skills. So there is a lot of variance throughout the county. And like I said, we do work to support the school in looking at those specific IEP goals and creating instruction around that.
Thank you. Which are the schools that offer the SESES group of services?
Okay, thank you for that question. We have 8 schools: Flower Valley, Flower Hill, Westbrook Elementary, Fairland Elementary, Flower Valley Elementary, Jones Lane Elementary, and I'm testing myself here. I'm missing one. We have a total of 8, so let me get back to you with the 2 that I'm missing.
Okay, and you could do that in the chat, perhaps.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it in the chat.
Why does Connections only start in 1st grade as opposed to kindergarten? And this is all part of the same question, is anything ABA based, and would twice exceptional students be placed in Connections?
So Connections initially began in kindergarten, And we found that at the time, the service was called our Asperger services. And we had not yet lost Asperger's from the DSM as a diagnostic category. We were finding that very young children were being diagnosed, perhaps appropriately, with Asperger's, and everyone was rushing to serve the students in the Asperger's services, which are still only in 2 schools, and at the time was only in 1. What we found was that if we provided some level of consultation support to our students, they were mostly able to be successful in kindergarten. At the time that we collected the data for about a 3-year trajectory, 92% of the students who were referred as kindergartners to the services, we never heard from again. They were successful in their neighborhood schools. And that really is our goal and our imperative in special education. And so we have found that starting in 1st grade ensures that we are serving the students that we need to serve and that we're not removing them from their home schools for no cause.
Okay.
Question, so part 2 is anything ABA based. I assume that refers to the connection services, but all of our services that are autism specific have an ABA based application to them. That of course looks different in our diploma services than it does in our ALO services that you'll hear about next. But yes, there are ABA themes in everything that we teach. Question 3, some 2E students are placed in connections, and many students in 2E services have a diagnosis of autism.
Okay, thank you. Would a student be able to try out each program as a trial to see which services would work best for them?
That is not something that I think an IEP team would encourage. We're talking about a broad range of services and students who each have their own particular needs, and it's our job to find the services that best match the child's IEP.
Okay. What is a typical class size and student to teacher ratio in the Connections program?
At the elementary level, we're typically looking at 8 to 10 in mixed grade level classes.
Okay. If a 5th grader is in a special classroom with a 3-year delay, is there any chance that one could place that child in a regular 2nd grade classroom?
Many parents have asked this question over the years about serving students with their developmental-alike peers as opposed to their age-alike peers. The law and best educational practice tells us that we need to serve our kids with their peer group to the greatest extent possible. It's unlikely that making that type of placement would begin to meet a child's developing social or academic needs.
Okay. What were the significant changes in MCPS special education from last year? In last year's presentation by the MCPS staff during this event, they gave student-teacher ratio information.
So this year, the budget has not been finalized. Last year, it had been. We are not anticipating major changes at the elementary level in staffing and ratio.
If an IEP team is considering moving a student from more restrictive services and ALO to a less restrictive service that is on in general education, because some of the behavioral and social skills have been mastered, would it be considered that the child repeat a grade level to help catch up on the grade level curriculum? And if not, why not?
I think one of my colleagues, I'll let Kelly answer that one.
Sorry, I see Claire Lanham answered that.
Oh, okay. Claire,
Okay.
do you want to answer it or you want me to jump in?
Why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay. So my teaching background is elementary, and I know we have elementary parents here. So high school seems so far away for everyone here. But students with IEPs have until age 21 to get all their high school credits. So while when our children are younger, we think let's have them repeat a grade so they can maybe catch up, we really want to save those years for high school so that they have more time to earn those credits. And then also adding on what Chris said about it's not best practice to have students repeat a grade. We want to take them at where they are and provide that specially designed instruction, a lot of those modifications that we talked about to help move them forward.
Okay, thank you. Will the chat be available in the recording? There are a lot of really helpful questions and responses. Sue, can you answer that?
Actually, this is Melanie. I believe we can offer a link to the chat. It may not be on the actual recording, but you'll be able to read the content. We can try to provide that.
Okay, great. You mentioned that Darnestown accepts students with the quote characteristics of autism. I thought it was just for autistic students.
So remember that even though we're talking about services that surround and support students who have autism, a diagnosis itself does not drive a placement. And so sometimes we see students in all of our services, whether it's a traditional learning center or an autism specific service, that have characteristics of other students with autism whose needs can be met in the characteristics of the service. And so that's why we use that terminology.
Okay, thank you. How do you provide social skills instruction to students in the homeschool model?
It's done through a variety of ways. Depending on the needs of the student, it can be part of the classroom instruction. Sometimes it's a group within the classroom where maybe the special education teacher or the counselor comes in and meets with a group of students around a specific skill. And then sometimes it could be a pull out to where you're pulling the student individually or the group of students to a quieter area to work on a skill. I typically recommend for my schools to use what we call a gradual release approach, which means you're working on a specific skill. So as the teacher, I'm going to model that, I'm demonstrating, and then I'm going to practice with my little group so that they're practicing alongside me. And then I'm gradually releasing them to practice independently with each other. And then I'm guiding them to practice that specific skill in the more generalized setting like the classroom or recess, and then monitoring and providing feedback.
Okay, thank you. In the models already discussed, what is the ratio of student to teacher, but also very importantly, how many paras are in the classroom?
I think that we have answered for traditional learning center.
Yeah.
For connections, for Darnestown, I'm going to guess that homeschool model varies. And the number of paraeducators also vary depending on the individual needs of the students. I'm not sure about going back and revisiting that.
Okay. What is the process for placing a student in any of the services and determining which service is most appropriate for the student? Is this part of the IEP process?
It is part of the IEP process. Like I said, it is really important that at the homeschool that the school-based team has exhausted everything that's available to them. When the school team feels that they are nearing that point, they reach out to one of their area supervisors. For instance, like I supervise a certain cluster of schools, so my schools reach out to me. Me or one of my colleagues goes in and consults with the team, reviews all the information, observes the student, and works with the team to potentially identify more appropriate services.
Okay. I have a question. Will twice exceptional placements be discussed today? I mean, they were mentioned, but I guess the question is, will they be discussed in the second half of this meeting?
No, we'd not plan to discuss twice exceptional when we developed our collaborative agenda. So no.
Okay. Where do kids go after graduating from the Darnestown Learning Center?
They go a variety of places, just as students leaving other learning centers go. Some may go to their neighborhood school. Some may go on to Autism Resource Services. It really depends individually.
Okay. What objective measures and/or assessments are used to determine if a student is a candidate for the Connections program?
For any, with someone. For any more restrictive set of services, we're looking at the whole student profile. So the cognitive profile, their educational profile, and then their school-based data, and looking at what the student needs. Chris, or someone you want to speak specific to Connections?
No, except to remind our audience that in keeping with what Ms. Duran just said, we then we talked earlier about the fact that although an autism diagnosis is not a requirement for placement in Connections, we know that students who have received that diagnosis are more likely to need, and their IEPs would reflect the types of services that are provided in Connections. So there's no cut and dry formula. There's no perfect
Chris? Okay.
I think Chris froze. I know she was having some storms where she is, so it's possible that, but I think I can finish what she was going to say. I think I know where she's going, which is, as she said, we have to think of the whole child, you know, legally and morally. We can never have just like a formula we're looking at, okay, XYZ Connections, XYZ Learning Center. So it really is like that collaborative IEP team decision, and parents, you're of course part of that IEP team.
Okay. Are there any programs that are oriented to kids who want social services but are not enrolled in a public school? And this would include, for example, kids who are being homeschooled.
So students who are being homeschooled, it's my understanding, and this I think is a little outside of the purview of this presentation, but do not have access to special education services within the county in the typical elementary environment. With that said, I know there are resources out there to support students with autism. There's a huge homeschool network, as far as speaking from a parent who have friends who homeschool.
Okay. What middle school programs do students from Sandburg typically go to?
Again, that depends. Many of our students go to their home school. You know, again, we take it on an individual basis, what the child's needs are. We try to exhaust all placements for public settings. And it depends if a student is diploma-bound or ALO. So again, it's just that really individualized. We go with the goals of the IEP and look at where a child can be successful.
Okay. Will a child still get services in the homeschool model if he or she is the only one with special needs in the class?
Absolutely, 100%.
Great. Okay, thank you. Does Darnestown Learning Center offer both diplomas and certification path, or just the diploma track?
The students in Darnestown are accessing the general education curriculum at the standard rate, so only diploma.
Okay. How are you teaching students without IEPs about neurodiversity so they respect their neurodiverse peers and their needs?
I can take this one. I did answer it in the chat, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. This is a really big passion of mine. I see all the people I'm working with are smiling. So this has definitely been a big push, I would say, especially in the past few years in MCPS, but of course it's a work in progress. So in the larger scale MCPS, thinking of, you know, we're looking at students in the general education setting who did not have IEPs. I can speak from the experience of the schools I'm in. I have seen a lot of movement around that Autism Acceptance Month in April. A lot of our school admin is getting very excited about that and coming to us asking, what can we do? What type of lessons can we do? How can we support? And that's been really exciting for us as special educators to lend our expertise to help you know, students who aren't autistic to understand and respect autism and to be good friends and advocates. That's really our goal. So I know many of us on this call have created lessons. We've gone into classrooms and done presentations. We've consulted with a lot of our colleagues. But of course, you know, we're not perfect and it is a work in progress, but I know it's something that we're all pretty passionate about.
Okay. What is the staff to student ratio at Darnestown Learning Center?
It can range, as we said earlier, from 7 to 10 students.
Okay.
What is the staff configuration there too?
So again, we have mixed grade classes. We have 1 teacher and 2 paraeducators.
What are typical services for nonverbal children with severe physical limitations? I think that's a question. In parentheses, it also says non-autistic, but let's just let it stand. Nonverbal with severe physical limitations.
So Anne Marie Tagliaferri did answer that, and what she's saying is our students who meet that profile may participate in a variety of services. Some students are in homeschool model, some may be in an alternate learning outcome service, and some may be in a separate special day school if they are students who are medically fragile as well.
Okay. What is MCPS's approach to students in autistic burnout who experience school refusal?
It's really an individualized approach. The school team works with the family to help create strategies to help get the student to school. Typically, the school team might employ someone from central office like myself to help support that. And then individually, we look at what the student needs in order to access school.
What is the responsibility of schools to help autistic students in the homeschool model navigate social challenges at recess?
It really depends on what the individual needs are per the IEP. You know, the reality is just like every school, every child in elementary school, we're teaching positive peer relations. So just like any child, if there is a negative interaction, the expectation is that adults intervene and support the children and teach them how to interact in a more positive way.
Okay, thank you. Is MCPS accepting and or using spell to communicate for kids with autism and apraxia who are unable to communicate in any other way?
I'm almost afraid to answer because my apologies for my crashing internet. MCPS uses a wide variety of communication applications and devices. I'm not personally familiar with spell to communicate. One of my colleagues may be, but there's certainly more devices and apps in place than I can count.
Okay. Okay, I understand the desire to start an incoming MCPS elementary student in the least restrictive program, but will MCPS teams work with parents for the proper placement if an incoming third or fourth grader with has an extensive history of successful learning interventions? In other words, is there an appeals process if MCPS places our children in a program we do not feel is appropriate? I guess the second sentence is the real question.
Absolutely. We have a resolution and compliance office that is very parent facing, and parents can reach out to them to learn about the different pathways for disagreeing with the school team, whether it be mediation or anything like that. I say that with a little caveat of we work very hard to collaboratively, or we work very hard to be collaborative with families, but there are times disagreements. So that is a good resource for parents.
Okay, thank you. It's 8 o'clock. I'm going to suggest we still have questions, but we can return to them after the second set of presentations. So I'm going to suggest we move to part 2.
Okay, I agree. So the remaining programs in tonight's presentation are designed for students who need additional special education support beyond what is offered in the previous programs that we heard about. So it's 4 programs that are left, and they all follow the alternate learning outcomes, or ALO track. We're going to get an overview of what the ALO is all about from our next speaker, Anne-Marie Tagliaferri. Ms. Tagliaferri is Supervisor for the Alternate Learning Outcomes Services, Extensions, School Community-Based, and Learning for Independence. Ms. Tagliaferri?
Good evening. Thank you so much. It's nice to be here tonight. If you can move to the next slide. So first, a brief overview of what we mean when we say the alternate learning framework, or our sort of umbrella term, the alternate learning outcomes. So there are a small number of students that, due to the nature and severity of their cognitive disability, participate in what we call the alternate framework. That includes 2 things, where the students then would participate in the alternate academic achievement standards and also participate in the state's alternate assessments. It is important to know, though, that all of our students who are pursuing those alternate learning outcomes receive instruction based on what we call our Maryland Career and College Readiness Standards that are aligned to their respective grades. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that in a moment. Those alternate standards, though, are reduced in breadth, depth, and complexity than those grade level standards. Again, I'll show you an example in the next slide. Students must be found eligible for participation as part of the IEP process. We use a tool called the Appendix A, which is a participation and criteria checklist. This is a term, if you're familiar with alternate learning outcomes, that you have likely heard before. And we've actually recently, as of November, had an upgrade to that tool. And as part of that process, the team does need to determine if a student has a significant cognitive disability. And a significant cognitive disability really looks at the impact of the student's disability on their cognitive needs as well as their adaptive and academic needs. Unique to the state of Maryland, parents are able to give their written consent or refusal for participation in those alternate standards and assessments. Next slide. Again, it's important to note that alternate standards are just that, alternate standards. They're not an alternate curriculum. And so here we have an example of 3rd grade. On the left column, those are the college and career readiness standards. And on the second column, there are what we call our essential elements that are really the alternate standards, those most important pieces taken from the standard. So I would urge you to look at that second row. Determine the main idea of a text, recount the key details, and explain how they support the main idea. That is a standard for 3rd grade students. In one of our alternate learning outcome services, the focus may be instead to identify the details in that text. And students may be able to identify those details by choosing from a variety of pictures paired with words, certainly with different communication devices and supports. So you can review that.
Melanie, I just wanted to jump in because someone just needs a clarification. What is the difference between cognitive and intellectual disability? Are they the same?
So a student, and I can, Haley, you're welcome to jump in on this, our resident school psychologist. But the student may have an intellectual disability. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a significant cognitive disability. So the significant cognitive disability is really looking at the impact of the student's disability on those main areas, their academics, their adaptive skills, and their cognitive skills. Haley, is there anything you'd like to add or clarify?
That was perfect, Anne Marie. Yes, you can. It is confusing. I think that's a great question because we tend to sometimes conflate those two terms. A way you can think of it is that when we're talking about for the purposes of ALO, all students who we deem to have a significant cognitive disability also meet criteria for an intellectual disability. However, there are some students that will meet criteria for a mild intellectual disability who we will deem as an IEP team do not meet criteria for a significant cognitive disability.
Thank you, Haley. And so you'll be able to see as part of this slide deck if you'd like to look at the other two standards and how they are aligned to our alternate standards. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about our first set of services. The first is our Learning for Independence, often referred to as LFI. And so our LFI students are self-contained classes in our comprehensive school buildings. Students are accessing, like I said, those alternate learning outcomes, and the students may have moderate intellectual disabilities and/or autism. In our Learning for Independence services, you're going to find students with a range of disabilities. We implement a more naturalistic teaching style in both large and small groups. Those large groups may be up to 10 to 12 students, and the small groups may be anywhere between 2 and 5. And when I say naturalistic, I'm really referring to that sort of I do, we do, you do teaching approach that is commonly found in our general education classrooms. That certainly includes lots of visual supports, manipulatives, and opportunities for repetition. Students, speaking of repetition, we know that our students do learn skills through repetition across multiple contexts. And so we do, in Learning for Independence, focus on teaching the skills in the classroom and then looking at how we can support students in mastering, maintaining, and generalizing those in other environments. And because of that, students do participate in what we call our real-world learning experiences and/or community-based instruction. So one time a week, our students go into the community to take the skills they've learned in their classroom that they've applied in their school and are ready now to take into their community. Students also participate with their general education peers for specials, lunch, recess. We also have a number of our Learning for Independence sites where the students are also assigned to a general education homeroom. We have lots of opportunities for inclusion based on the students' individual needs. And as I shared before, there's typically around 10 to 12 students, and there is a teacher and a paraeducator. The picture that you see here is one of our students at the NASA Goddard Space Center after having completed a unit on space in science. You can move to the next slide, thank you. So our next set of services is called School Community Based. It's also referred to as SCB. As you know, in MCPS, we love our acronyms. And here we also have self-contained special education classrooms that are, again, in a regular comprehensive elementary school. All the students are accessing those alternate learning outcomes, but they may be a bit more impacted by their disability in relation to the services that I just spoke about. Students in the school community base often need more direct instruction in their communication. And so much of their time in school is really centered around that, building the communication, while also trying to establish really reliable methods of response so that the teachers and paraeducators can really accurately assess their skills.
Our students in school community-based services also often need more support in their self-care or adaptive routines. They may be fully adult dependent on those, at least initially, while we really work to promote that independence. The instructional style is the same, though it may be reduced a bit in breadth and complexity in the school community-based classroom than the services I just described. And again, it's that I do, we do, you do. A lot of modeling, a lot of prompting, and really gradually feeding those prompts away to promote that independence of the skill. Our students in school community-based, again, are going to learn those skills in multiple contexts and participate in those real-world learning experiences. So they'll work on skills in the classroom, then they will work on them and try and master them within their school community, and then they're going to take them into the outside community, again, for opportunities for generalization and practice. We certainly have students who are included, and that is really based on the student's individual needs. Our classrooms typically have around 6 to 8 students with a teacher and 2 paraeducators. And I will turn it over to Brandy and Lisa.
All right, good evening, everyone. I am Brandy Bechtold, a program specialist in the autism unit. It is nice to be here with all of you this evening. Lisa and I will be reviewing the classic autism services. Right now, we are serving over 400 students across 25 schools and 62 classrooms at the elementary level. Our classic autism services do go all the way through high school, but we are going to focus on that elementary level at this time. So as mentioned earlier, most of our students in autism services may have a diagnosis of autism. However, the diagnosis does not drive the placement. A common misconception is that all students with an autism diagnosis are served in autism services. Many students in our program have needs with adaptive skills or life functioning skills, such as toileting, hand washing, and just overall working on increasing their independence across skills. And these are things that we're targeting within the school day with the extra support given in the program. Some of our friends in the classic autism services do exhibit some behaviors. Behaviors are a result of a lack of communication and vary from student to student. When students show behaviors, sometimes it presents in the form of harming themselves, body dropping, and/or crying. Often our students have difficulty sitting for prolonged periods of time or attending to instruction that includes a lot of language. This can also lead to high frustration levels that can also cause some behaviors such as pushing, hitting, or biting others in the room. Again, the behaviors are a result of communication needs and abilities. And so we have a primary focus on teaching those communication skills to our students from the time they come into the school building until the time that they get back on the bus to come home. This helps with their social skills, it helps improve their academic skills, and it also helps decrease some of those behaviors we may be seeing. Communication in our program, all of our students do have communication needs. Some are nonverbal communicators, some use oral language. Some of our students do have echolalia, where they're repeating words back or phrases that they've heard repeatedly or in a prior situation. To help students gain language and communication skills, many of our students need multiple ways of communicating. So we have students that are using some words or approximations of words. They're also using picture cues, gestures, vocalizations, and other tools to help get their needs and wants met, and also to expand their sentences or phrases. Staff are always providing modeling and reinforcement so that students, are learning to communicate and interact with others. We also work on social skills within our program. We want to establish motivation to interact with others and develop appropriate learning behaviors. Our primary focus is on teaching those foundational skills, such as matching, imitation, listening and responding to directions and instruction, answering questions, initiating and responding to greetings, production of and imitation of sounds and words, to help students gain language and communication skills. Many of our students need multiple ways to communicate, as we talked about, and so we're really just focusing on giving them those foundational skills to be successful in the school environment. So as Ms. Amory stated earlier, the Classic Autism Services is also a program that serves students on the alternate learning framework. The students are accessing curriculum with significant modifications, including identified instructional accommodations, supplementary aids and services, assistive technology, and related services as indicated on the child's IEP. So again, these are all things that are individualized, that are outlined on your students' IEPs that will be carried out throughout the school day. The students are accessing those alternate learning outcomes and are pursuing a certificate of program completion. And the students in this program are not currently working toward that high school diploma. And then students are provided with significantly modified instruction and assessments that are less rigorous than grade level standards and assessments. And now I will pass it to Ms. Lisa Grant.
Good evening. Just to carry on with the discussion about our classic autism services, all of our students have IEPs that are stated that they need a self-contained classroom outside of the general education environment to be taught by a special education teacher. All of our classrooms are typically 6 or 7 students with 1 special education teacher and 2 paraeducators. So it is a smaller staff to student ratio, if you will, because all of our students have pretty significant needs. Our classrooms offer a highly structured school day with opportunities for individualized learning. If you look at the way that we are teaching our instruction, which is based off of the principles of applied behavior analysis, many of our students are taught almost individual, so I'd be working directly one-on-one with the student while another student is engaging in either reinforcement or a task that he has learned to do independently. In our classroom, we use a lot of reinforcement. We believe in the principle of reinforcement for both academic tasks and appropriate school behavior. And we do use discrete trial instruction. So earlier we talked about there was a question about ABA and its use in all of this, in the Connections program or in the autism services. In the Classic Autism program, the type of ABA that we do use is principles of reinforcement, that discrete trial instruction, which is very different than your traditional specialized instruction. Next slide. Instruction is provided in dyads, which is 2 students to 1 adult, or triads, which is 3 students to 1 adult, for an average of 3 hours per day. The instruction is individualized based on IEP goals and objectives. So you may find that you have students who are working on matching in the area of math. You also might find another student in the same classroom who's working on counting with one-to-one correspondence. And then a third student might be working on simple math addition problems or single-digit math addition problems using manipulatives and visual templates. So really the instruction is based on the child's current strengths and their academic needs. We do provide group instruction twice daily in the areas of reading and math. Group instruction is typically challenging for our students, but it is something that we practice every day. For some students, the goal is just for them to sit in a group with their peers for the duration of the activity. For others, it might be to engage and participate fully, and then there's the wide range in between. Most of our students, actually all of our students, participate in lunch and recess inside the general education environment with their non-disabled peers, which means that they go into the cafeteria to eat lunch with other students similar to their age. So all of our classrooms are combination classrooms. You might have a kindergarten, first grade combination class, a second and third grade combination class, and a fourth grade, fifth grade combination class. And so we do select a grade level to go to lunch and recess with. And our paraeducators do go with our students because many of them do continue to need support in the cafeteria with not just opening their lunch or helping with their lunch, but also for the behavioral support that they may need to remain seated and to stay with the group. All of our specials are self-contained: art, music, PE, and media. And again, they are supported by classroom staff. So the two paraeducators go with the students to their specials each week. And that is really, again, to support them in just their learning, their participation, and to also help with communication and behavior. We do begin community-based instruction in grade 3. Community-based instruction is where we take the content that we've been teaching in the classroom and we apply it to real-world learning. Some of our community-based instruction might be to go to the store and to find items in the store that we've selected. So we might do a lesson in the classroom that talks about going to Target and we need to go find a hairbrush and some toothpaste, and they have pictures, and our goal is to then go and find those items. Sometimes we do make a purchase. We also might go and practice having a meal out in the community. We do seek input from families as kind of what their goals are for their students and where they do shop and where they do go out in the community. And I am going to turn it back over to Anne-Marie Tagliaferri to talk about the extensions program.
You're on mute, Anne-Marie.
I am on mute. I apologize. I apologize if there's any background noise. So our extension services are the last set of services we're going to talk about this evening. And our extension services are our most restrictive services they can find in our comprehensive school buildings. Next slide. So extension services are for students who need additional behavioral and social emotional support. These are all students who are accessing those alternate learning outcomes, and they are students with a variety of disabilities, including intellectual disability and autism. In our extension services, based on our staffing system, we are able to teach in both naturalistic style, as well as students may receive more direct instruction or discrete trial based on how those students acquire skills. These students are also, again, taught just as in our school community-based and in our learning for independence through repetition across multiple contexts. And so we are looking again at how we teach our students those skills in their classroom, how they're able to demonstrate them and practice them in their school, and then finally, how they're able to generalize them in their school or in their outside community. And so starting in elementary school, our students do participate in community-based instruction 1 time a week. We do have opportunities for inclusion based on individual student needs. Typically, when a student comes to the extension services, it is because their behavior is impacting their ability to access the curriculum. And so that is often, our students may not participate in their inclusive opportunities initially. And then we look at it over time as an IEP team. Our classes have typically around 6 to 7 students, and we do have a high staff to student ratio. We typically have 1 teacher and 3 paraeducators, and you may find additional staffing in those classrooms as needed. Something unique to our extension services is that we do have other personnel, professional personnel, to support our students, families, and our teachers. We have a program specialist, a behavior support teacher, a school psychologist, and a social worker. Extensions, like I said, is one of our more restrictive set of services, and our goal always is to support our students in reducing those challenging behaviors, teaching them new replacement behaviors, and supporting their return to less restrictive services.
Hi, this is Melanie. Ms. Tagliaferri, can you just define for some of the parents what you mean when you say inclusion-based or inclusive opportunities?
Sure. So that would be opportunities for our students to participate in activities, academic activities, particularly with their grade level peers. So we may have students who are going into a reading class or a math class, certainly, as well as having the students participate in more social activities such as recess and or other school-wide events.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have time for more questions and answers now. So Nora may have some questions teed up, and I'll just remind everyone that you can raise your hand and ask questions out loud if that's your preference. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Are nonverbal students accepted in the Connections program?
So it depends on what you mean by nonverbal. We have never had a student who relied on a voice output device or other written means of communication meet the service profile of the students in the Connections program. Typically, as we discussed earlier, our students can be extremely verbal, and a lot of the social skills and academic content depend on that verbal ability and motivation. We will never say anybody will never be served in any of our services, however.
Okay. If a student is 2 to 3 years behind grade level, will they be able to continue at such a 2 to 3 year gap throughout middle and high school toward a diploma, or will they be pushed toward ALO?
It depends on the individual student at the time. When we look at the transition from middle to high school, we look at the individual student's data, and the IEP team uses the tools and resources to help make decisions.
And also a good thing to remember is for that ALO piece, that presence of a significant cognitive disability has to be there. And there's a lot of different pieces of data that are used to determine that. So a student could be multiple grade levels behind, their chronological age, but if we don't have the data to say they have a significant cognitive disability, ALO is not considered, because there can be multiple reasons that a student might be behind grade level, right? So like Kelly said, it's really an individual decision based on all the information we have about that student.
And also keep in mind that section of the IEP with the accommodations and the supplementary aids and services, those are there to help the student access grade level curriculum. So while the student may instructionally be 2 years behind in his or her reading level, there's things that we put in place to help make progress in the grade level curriculum.
Okay, thank you. And do paraeducators receive the same professional development in terms of neurodiversity affirming approaches as other MCPS educators do?
Yes, we have provided professional learning opportunities to paraeducators as well as teachers on those topics.
Okay. Where does Ivy Mount School fall in terms of the categories you've described, and how are kids admitted to Ivy Mount?
So Ivy Mount is a separate private special education school. We refer students to those non-public settings when we've exhausted all public service models. That's typically made, I mean, that is always a referral that's made through a central IEP process.
Okay. Let's see. Is there a difference between services provided at schools listed under autism spectrum disorder services and school-based learning centers?
Yes, we reviewed the school-based learning centers as being the range of traditional learning centers that are more cluster or area-based. And then we also reviewed our specific autism services that tonight included Connections, Darnestown, Classic Autism.
Okay. You may have answered this, but again, what is the typical staff to student ratio for LFI?
In LFI, we typically have around 12 students, 1 teacher, and 1 paraeducator.
Okay. What trainings do paraeducators in classic autism services receive?
They can access sorry, Lisa, go
No,
ahead.
no, go
Lisa,
ahead, Chris.
So our paraeducators can access and do access a variety of training around the principles of a structured classroom, positive reinforcement, discrete trial instruction, positive approaches to challenging behavior. And this last January paraeducator training day, we also introduced a series of neurodiversity lessons.
Okay. What would you say the advantages of LFI versus classic autism services are? If a child is in a classic autism program, are they eligible for LFI? And again, what are the main differences?
So I described in my answer that the main difference is the instructional model. And so our students in Learning for Independent Services are typically able to learn new skills in those large and small group contexts with that more natural style of teaching. Whereas students in the classic autism services typically then require more direct instruction and skills taught out of context in order to learn those, and then they work on generalizing them.
Okay. How do you assess whether or not a student has a significant cognitive disability? The person who asked this question says she's trying to figure out how her son might be better served by an ALO program, or if her son might be better served by an ALO program.
I could try to take this one, but anybody else jump in if you want. This is a great question. So essentially the way we will do this is through a variety of assessments. This is typically going to include an assessment by a school psychologist. Typically, we would also look for an educational assessment, which a special educator or general educator will complete, as well as any other relevant service providers. And really what we are looking for with those assessments is there a really significant impact we're seeing in a few different areas? One would be intellectual ability. So if we're able to give a cognitive assessment, how did the student score on that? And do we feel that score is a valid representation of their ability right now? We're also going to look at their adaptive behavior. And that's where parent input is super important, because sometimes children can act really differently at home than at school, as I'm sure you know. So we really want to get a sense of what can this student do in real life? What is their toileting like, their feeding, their ability to follow directions, their ability to find things in their environment, all those little skills that help us to get through life. How are they doing with those? And then we're also looking at their learning. So, you know, in terms of their academic achievement, where are they're compared to their same age peers? What has their rate of learning been like? So we're really looking at a lot of different pieces of data, and we're looking for all of those pieces of data to kind of align more or less to help us to really be certain that we're making the right determination when we say a child has a significant cognitive disability.
Okay, thank you. Is there an autism team available to bring autism-specific training to general educators, special educators, and paraeducators in a homeschool model? And if there is, could you provide a contact?
So as part of our services through the autism unit, we do have a consult process. We always want a school first, serving a student in homeschool model, to access resources like their supervisor, Ms. Duran is one of those, an instructional specialist, and other area-based people who might know and follow a student longer through their school career. However, on their recommendation, we do provide consultation that can take place in a number of ways. We can provide virtual consultation. We sometimes do on-site observation and follow-up. We are offering a number of professional development opportunities and have since the beginning of the school year for general educators. And we are in the process of developing a module for part of this summer's planned professional development. So there's not one team per se, it's more of a process that involves both area supervisors and our unit.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Can kids in the Learning Center, or specifically Darnestown Learning Center, pursue certificates rather than diplomas?
So that decision is made on a yearly basis. Most of the students who are in Darnestown or our other 11 learning centers are students who are accessing the general curriculum and are therefore pursuing a diploma. It is possible, however, later in life that a student is found eligible for ALO, but that's a complex and individual circumstance. Dr. Bedanda talked a little bit about that. Okay.
Is there a maximum number of one-on-one support hours in the homeschool before a student is moved into an autism program?
We look at the approach isn't just a one-on-one hours. We're looking at what the student needs, developing the IEP that is centered around what the student needs, and determining if that can be implemented in the homeschool. Like when we think of the classic autism program that Lisa Grant spoke of, there are things in those services that are very difficult to do in the homeschool. So we would look at if that's what the child needs, then that's what we would look at to see if it's appropriate.
Okay. Are there alternate testing types available as opposed to the standardized tests that determine where a student's strengths and difficulties lie?
We use a combination of the formal standardized tests and informal data. And we look for patterns and trends because we know sometimes children don't do well in a test. So we compare it to the classroom data. So the bottom line is, yes, we use both formal and informal assessments.
Okay. What training specifically related to autism do paraeducators in the homeschool model receive?
I think that depends more on what they access. We just completed a paraprofessional training day in January where, as a county, we trained more than 800 special education paraeducators. Among those offerings were training specific to autism, and referencing back our earlier discussion about consultation and a training team. If a consultation had been requested, part of our response may have been to invite all staff working with a student to a training specific to autism.
Okay. What services are offered at the Burning Tree Center?
Burning Tree Elementary School has homeschool model services, and they are one of the sites for the Learning Center.
Okay, I actually do not see any more questions. Unless Julie, you tell me there are a few that you just haven't transferred. And I don't see any hands up.
There's one more question coming, Nora.
Okay, oh yeah, here we are. Okay, if your child is moved out of the homeschool, can you choose or decline another placement? I'm speaking specifically regarding the social emotional program. I'm thinking maybe that refers to the SES.
So, you know, like I said earlier, the goal is to make collaborative decisions with families. Sometimes there are disagreements. When you have a disagreement, my recommendation is always to exercise your parental rights. Reach out to the Resolution and Compliance Office and let them walk you through how to voice disagreement.
Okay. What percentage of elementary students are categorized as autistic? And is the number rapidly increasing?
So we don't have that specific breakdown tonight. I know that approximately 3,600 students in Montgomery County have a primary educational diagnosis of autism. And yes, the number continues to increase rapidly. We are growing in that population by approximately 17% per year, which I think still mirrors national and international growth. I'm not up to on my statistics this month, though.
Okay. Okay, I see a hand. Neha Agarwal, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
So I had a question, like normally at which grade level that determination for ALO is made? I mean, from what I read or what I heard, it is the student has to be 2 or 3 years behind grade level to be considered for ALO.
So that determination could be made at truly any age or grade level, but the decision does not have to be made until the last year of high school. And so it's an IEP team decision. The team may go through the tool. They would go, if they do, they would go through it then every year after. But I know that we do keep repeating this, but it really would be an IEP team decision. And then the family would be able to provide their consent or their refusal for your child to participate. But it varies greatly in which grade level we do that.
I had a follow-up question. What if the family disagrees with the decision for ALO? Then can they go to the community that you just like mentioned, like resolution committee or something?
Yeah, they may go to the resolution and compliance, but also then the IEP team would likely need to meet again and determine that if the student is working towards those grade level standards, which set of services would be best and what supports would that child need.
Okay. Thank you.
What are the criteria for being placed in the Asperger's program, and why does it begin in first grade and only in 2 elementary schools?
We did already answer that. There are no cut and dried criteria. It's a service match from the services recommended on the student's IEP to the characteristics of the program. It begins in first grade to avoid young kindergarten students being inappropriately removed from their homeschool setting simply because there's a service available somewhere. And it is only in 2 elementary schools because unlike any of our other services, the numbers of students needing those services have remained very stable over the last 10 years.
Okay. We have requested consultation and observation from an autism specialist to provide input to our child support team, but have not been able to receive it. What next step should we take?
So I'm going to urge whoever wrote this to talk to their case manager. Consultative services are not one thing, one person, one office, or one unit, and they're provided as a service to the school team. as much as we want parents to know and feel comfortable that there are people who are responsive to the needs of an autistic child, they can be many different people from many different offices. And we are not a parent response program. We are MCPS, and we respond to the request of a school team. However, talk to the case manager and see, did the team agree that they needed a consultation? And if so, have they started the steps to work with their area supervisor?
Okay, thank you. How is the critical shortage in special education staff impacting all these services currently?
So I can speak for autism specific services and a little bit for other ALO services. We have found that we are beginning to see a shortage in our diploma services of teachers. It's a very small percent compared to our alternate learning outcome programs, where I believe that Ms. Tagliaferri and I have collaborated on trying to recruit for upper 20 teacher vacancy numbers. So I know that in classic autism, we have 15 teacher vacancies, I think, today. And I think in Ms. Tagliaferri's services, there are another 10. We also are struggling with paraeducator vacancies. I know that in autism services, we have approximately 35 paraeducator vacancies. And those numbers, I think, are echoed across other ALO programs and Carl Sandburg Learning Center.
Okay. How do the characterization of autism as level 1, 2, and 3 play a role in the categories you have described?
They, from our placement perspective, they don't. It can often inform the reader. It can help us understand a student who comes to us with an outside assessment. But again, it's an individual decision based on individual student data and not so much those categories.
Okay, and here I have a nice numbers question. Are the 3,600 students who are labeled as autistic through their primary diagnosis, does that figure relate to K through 12 or elementary students only? And what is the neurotypical student population in relation to the 3,600?
So that number is actually a pre-K through 21 number. So our preschoolers, although many, at any rate, so it's from 3 to 21, and it doesn't, it's obviously can't factor in students who have a developmental delay code, who many of whom will be later diagnosed as a student with.
I think Chris froze. Can anyone finish that comment?
Typical student population, 21.
Oh, okay. You froze for a second there. Thank you, Chris. Is there a way to observe a class at the Darnestown Learning Center to see how different it is from a local learning center?
We do provide tours for students for families whose child is being referred to Darnestown. We don't encourage people simply visiting any service because it is disruptive to our students.
Okay. How long does the assessment for a significant cognitive disability take? This person is trying to figure out whether she needs to start the process for placement in the upcoming school year or even during summer ESY.
So school teams must complete assessments within 90 days of the written consent for assessment. So if you were to have an IEP team meeting from that date, they would have 90 days.
Okay. Do you have an open house for the Autism Connections schools? Or the Autism Connection programs in the schools?
I think Chris might be frozen again, so I'll answer that one. Like with Darnestown, we have regularly scheduled tours at the Elementary Autism Connections sites. But we do encourage that those are for families whose students are being considered for potential placement into connections, because it is disruptive to our students. We certainly welcome any of those families whose child might be considered, and they can just contact the autism office directly to schedule that.
Okay. The next question, I'm going to take a guess at what it means. What is the benefit for a student who has been diagnosed with autism versus, I guess, the benefit of being diagnosed as developmentally delayed?
Do you want me to take this, or
I could, oh, go
got
ahead.
it? Lisa, I saw you unmuted.
I was just
Go
going
for
to
it.
say, I don't know if there's any advantage because the diagnosis does not drive services or placement. We look at a student's strengths and needs and the goals that they require. And the only thing I would say is that there are now outside of the school system for students who have a diagnosis of autism. The autism waiver is something that could be made available to a family versus the developmental delay code. That would be the only benefit that I know of. Kelly, did you have something to add?
Nope.
Okay. I see a question that apparently also requires a Spanish interpretation. Do all kids with an autism diagnosis qualify for ESY?
No, they do not.
Okay. I do not see any more hands up, and I don't see, oh no, I see one question appearing, one more question. All right. If the results of a cognitive assessment are in conflict with each other, can certain parts of the assessments be redone?
I can take this one. So that's a good question. Typically, we would not be redoing an assessment because then we would have a retest effect, which means we're doing the same assessment right afterwards and it wouldn't be valid anymore. If the family is not in agreement with any assessment that the school team does, they do have the right to request an individual educational evaluation, and that would be done through the resolution and compliance unit, and the school team could give them guidance on how to do that at the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I actually think we can wrap up the Q&A portion now. I don't see any hands, and I think we've covered all the questions either in discussion or individually in the chat. So Sue, do you want to?
Okay, I think so too. Okay.
Wrap it up?
Thank you so much to all the MCPS staff who presented and answered questions tonight. You shared a lot of important information that isn't always easy for parents to find, so that's great. Special thanks to Secan, Supervisor of Autism Services, and her whole staff who've been collaborating with xMinds for years to serve the autism community. I'd like to invite everyone in our audience to complete a short 3-question feedback form. To get to that feedback form, use the link that Annie is about to put in the chat. Is it there? Okay, good. So we've recorded this presentation and we'll email you a link to the recording in the next few days, as well as a link to the slides. And we have recorded it in both Spanish and English, as well as the 2 sessions that were on Tuesday as well. And so we'll be sending out an email with a link to all the presentations that we did on Tuesday, that you did really on Tuesday and Thursday today. I want to also invite you to our March 19th kickoff to our anti-bullying series, which we are co-sponsoring, which xMinds is co-sponsoring with our friends at the Autism Society of Maryland. We will have on March 19th, the world-renowned self-advocate and professor of special education, Dr. Stephen Shore, with us. He's an incredibly wonderful speaker, and he's going to be speaking about what I've learned about bullying. So you can find all our upcoming events on our calendar at xminds.org. And I think that wraps it up for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night.